What's going on, family? It's our day, also known as Orire, and I am here with my brother and sister, Khari and Ansharaye. Really dope people. I was blessed to go to Howard with them on campus. They were involved in everything, all types of political activism, study groups, African cultural organizations. They're both doing dope work in their careers and cities, both extremely well-read, people whose opinions I respect highly. So when I wanted to convene a conversation about navigating Black trauma and oppression with everything that's going on, I thought who better to call than these two amazing Black people. So I'll let them just introduce themselves real quick and then we'll get into it.
All right, I'll start. Hi, everybody. I'm Ansharaye. I currently am in Philadelphia and I work with an organization called the Center for Black Educator Development. And in short, what I do is prepare high school students for careers in education, but doing that with a mind toward thinking about what it means to be an educator of African descent and your responsibility to the community because of your position, and contextualizing that in the long history of what education means to Black people and how we socialize generations of people through the process that they're educated with, for better or for worse. So we're trying to put together a coalition of people who are doing that for the better.
Dope.
Yeah, so my name is Khari. I'm born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. I attended African Center Institution from the time I was 2.5 until the time I graduated high school. I went off to Howard. I now am a teacher at that school and work for the organization that runs the school and our many programs that we do in the community. I'm also just kind of in a place now over the past year or so in a deep space of personal development, and attempts at transformation, personal transformation. And the pandemic and the increased isolation at home has really intensified, that quest. So, just looking always at ways to become better, more clear, and more effective in the work that we say needs to be done. So.
Absolutely. So I just start off with a quick framing question. I feel like we talk about oppression or Black trauma a lot. And sometimes these terms can be discussed in a very vague sense, and I think that they have different meanings depending on who you are and where you are. So an Afro-Brazilian man or woman may have a different experience with oppression than an Afro-American in Mississippi or Afro-Cuban or Haitian or Jamaican. And so I just want to start off with a framing question, like what do these terms, oppression, Black trauma, mean to you? And if you want to talk about just any of the historical context behind that, that would be appreciated too.
Yeah, so I think for me, I don't think you can talk about oppression in this context without talking about what we were here for. And Black people, African people are here in the United States for one reason and one reason only, to provide labor and to ease the burden of Europeans. And of course, when slavery was abolished through war, there then began to find a new use for us. And so I think what we've been dealing with since 1865 is Europeans trying to figure out how useful we are, and us trying to figure out how to prove our worth and our usefulness to Europeans beyond what they have established. And I think the oppression comes from the attempts of us to express our humanity and have it validated, but also their attempts to repress every expression of our humanity. And I think what we see is the clash of those two actions. So to me, any of those things would be considered oppression, whether it's stuff at the grocery store or these heightened, intensified acts of violence, police violence, but it's everywhere.
Yeah, like Khari mentioned, part of what I have experienced and have been struggling with also as somebody of African descent in America is the resistance that you meet at every turn when you are attempting to live your just full human life as a person. And I think part of what we find ourselves continually having to explain is that what makes oppression and like racism in America so sinister is that it's built into all of the institutions that we have to interact with. And part of what I mentioned that I do, like as a part of somebody who works in education, it's often really difficult to see how, even in the curriculum and the way that history is taught, just when you position somebody from the beginning, like Khari said, like these persons were brought in enslaved, and from that moment have been trying to fight in order to exist in just human ways and survive economically, and have been betrayed by the law constantly and have had to struggle to maintain and sustain their families, their mental health, all of those, their health period. Like we, having to hear the story of Henrietta Lacks, like as an adult, like as a Black woman specifically, and just thinking about that oppression and the fact that her family still doesn't have access to health and healthcare and stable, like even like the profits that were made off of the exploitation of her cells and her body. All of those things are factors of oppression in the way that we exist in America. And then they manifest and come out in like these short bursts when we have to deal with like the super overt consequences of being murdered in the street or whatever, or having to deal with the consequences of an election of a, of a white racist. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just to chime in, like I agree with y'all answers wholeheartedly. I like, Khari, that you contextualized it in history. You know, it didn't start yesterday. It didn't start 60 years ago. It didn't start 100 years ago. We were brought here with a specific purpose. And so when you understand that, it kind of helps to paint the big picture for everything that's going on now and has been going on since then. And Ansharaye, I love the answer that you gave, because it's like, it's pervasive, man. It's everything. It's overt. It's covert. It's the stuff that you experience at the grocery store. It's the stuff you experience just trying to exist as a Black person. And then it's also very institutional, like in education that you mentioned, in economic racism, you know, healthcare, political racism, as you mentioned. So it's multifaceted and it's kind of all encompassing. And yeah, so this kind of leads me to my second question. It's about how this oppression or trauma that we experience, how does it affect us? I mean, this is a large question because it's a topic of hundreds and hundreds of books. But you know, what types of effects do you observe that this hundreds of years of oppression has had on Black people? What type of effects has it had on you, your family members? And if, I know this is a nuanced question, so again, you know, if you want to speak specifically, like as a Black woman, what you've experienced, or as a Black man.
Part of, and I'm going to start this time by contextualizing it within the things that are happening right now, because I got into a debate online, and everybody in my life has been counseling me like, don't do it. Stay out the streets, don't argue with people. But I'm in the house. And what the conversation I ended up in an argument with this Black man who's becoming an attorney. And he was talking about whether or not looting was an acceptable form of resistance in response to the injustice that's happening. And the conversation ended up going in the direction of, hey, listen, I know that you are positioning yourself to say that like looting is unlawful, but you cannot use the law at any point in American history as justification of what is right or what is fair to Black people, because we were lawfully enslaved, we were lawfully oppressed and discriminated against. Like, back to what we were saying about the fact that this is so built into an institution, and because we were brought in as laborers and denied humanity from the beginning, like, and also because all of those factors are being exacerbated by the current pandemic, like people who were already suffering economically, like Philadelphia as the poorest big city, what they keep putting on us as the poorest big city. Like, there are Black people, Black communities right now in total economic distress, and having to encounter just people because we're valued because of our labor, because we're valued because of the work that we can or cannot provide. if you are somebody who had an hourly job right now, cannot work, has been in the house, does not have access to the things you need regularly, then of course you're going to bust down some stores and you're going to take you're going to take things. That is inappropriate to me, an appropriate response and resistance to a capitalistic society that has on purpose really oppressed and subdued you from the moment your ancestors were brought here because of your race. And I was listening to my mom on the phone earlier, and she was saying, like, anybody right now who is in the position to condemn looting and say looting is wrong, 100%, I bet you that y'all can go downstairs and you have your needs met. Like, you have the things that you need in the house, you have food, your children have the things you need, you have clothes, you have whatever. So if you can say that, if you can go downstairs and be like, oh no, I'm good, then you really don't have any room to be able to say that people recollecting the capital that they are owed because the United States was built on their backs is wrong. Because all of that is an element of what oppression looks like. And for real, people are tired of being ignored and oppressed by systems that will uphold monuments to racism. The other thing that I've really been struggling with too is we have this Rizzo statue of Frank Rizzo, and I mentioned this last time we talked. Frank Rizzo, police commissioner in Philadelphia, he is a symbol of white terrorism and racism in Philadelphia. He just terrible. But his statue was graffitied and people attempted to tear it down during the initial protests that were happening in Philadelphia. And the very next day, it was cleaned, spotless, like cleaned, like nothing ever happened. And in addition to that, there's now like police barricades and like police on horses protecting this thing. That is a visual representation of the fact that Black people did not matter to white people. And we're for real, we're done campaigning for our lives to matter in white people's faces for real, because forget all that. But it is a symbol of that history of the oppression of Black people in Philadelphia, and it still stands, and they're protecting it, just like they protect every other insidious representation of racism in America, period. Institutionally protect these things. So that's what oppression looks like and feels like.
I just want to real quick before you go, Khari. Yeah, no, that's. I love that answer, and I think that sometimes those kind of in your face things kind of like sound like salt on the wound. Like folks are already struggling in the city.
Absolutely.
From Corona, they're already economic disparities. Coronavirus comes along. Then the stuff of police brutality, the latest instance of it comes along, and then you still have these symbols of racism kind of staring you in the face, and it's kind of like rubbing salt on your wound.
Absolutely.
So I love the answer, because it's like it's a mental and emotional kind of
yeah,
face, on top of everything.
And could you imagine if that energy had gone toward protecting the people? Like, where the people are the people who are in need right now. This statue is lifeless, and moreover, it's a symbol of oppression. And that is the first, that is just incredible. Like, the meaning of them, really standing up to protect this symbol should tell you everything you need to know about what oppression looks like and how people are exhausted of campaigning to a hostile system to respond to their needs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was thinking about the trauma, and of course we have our personal trauma that manifests because all of us, I think the trauma breeds in our families. So families teach trauma in relationship to each other, and our attitudes towards the larger power dynamic are also informed by trauma more than anything. I think we saw a large pushback with this latest murder, a large pushback on social media about how the murder reinforces trauma. Of course, at the expense of our mental health, we're trying to prove to Europeans that our lives matter. We want them to see our pain. We want them to feel our pain. And the simple reality is that most Europeans don't see us as human. I cannot speak for every individual, and every individual really doesn't matter, but the system does not recognize our humanity. And I think I think these latest moments, what happens is they shock us out of forgetfulness. Because I think what happens is we can watch the latest Hollywood blockbuster, we can listen to the latest Grammy nominated or Grammy award winning Black musician, or we can see all of these very visible examples of Black progress and forget that at its core, every institution spits in the face of Black people because we don't have any power. And I think these moments, depending upon how we internalize this feeling of oneness, these moments shock us awake. It's like we forget that what we're holding on to is electrifying, and then when it shocks us, that's when we jump back in surprise and in anger. And I think, and it's deeply traumatic. And I think about the relationship of Black people in the United States to a person in an abusive relationship, and how the person has shown you time and time again that they do not value your safety, they don't value your health, they don't value your humanity. And as individuals, if we knew a woman or a man who was in an abusive relationship, we would tell that man, that woman to get out of the abusive relationship. If you broke and you can't leave, start Uber driving, start door dashing, start Instacarting, stack you some paper, stack you something so that you can get out of that relationship. And we are clear about the urgency of that. But I think when it comes collectively, I think sometimes our imagination fails us and our study fails us. So we don't think there is an option beyond this space. And so we'd rather try and force the brick wall to talk back to us and to grow arms and love us than to create systems of power that can advance Black life and then defend Black life. And so I think these moments are the expression of that trauma of denial, that trauma of rejection, and the trauma that comes when you look to your oppressor for validation, and all the ways that manifests itself.
Man, like,
I also want to say real quick, I can't forget to say, the ways that trauma manifests in communities happens, I think, manifests as far as our health. The studies that have been done as far as the way that stress and racialized experiences cause stress in Black bodies and shorten our lifespans. They affect our physical hearts. They affect our mental health. They affect, sometimes are built into our bodies and the things we pass on to our children. They affect, or they come out. The other thing that we mentioned too is the fact that they come out in the way that we try to cope, the self-medicating practices that we have, the way that we learn to relate to each other, the ways that we maybe even attempt to keep each other safe, the disciplining that we do towards our children, the practices that we think are appropriate and when we're relating to each other, substance abuse, period. There's a lot of things that go on. Oh, also the way that people opt out of a system just because it has been failing them so much. Like, and they opt out sometimes into harmful alternatives. Like, I'm rejecting this school, I'm rejecting this homework. Like, you can't convince me that it's going to lead to anything of value because I know the reality of the system. Those are things that happen when people have been overly traumatized.
Man, yeah, like, and this conversation always kind of gets me emotional because it's something I saw in both of your answers is like, sometimes it's just around you and it just weighs on you. And sometimes it's like being in toxic air, and you can't see it, but you can feel it, but you don't always know that it's there and all of its effects. And so y'all mentioned, like, in your families, sometimes we have these toxic coping mechanisms, like Ansharaye mentioned, like some things that we just do that we think they're normalized, within our families. And until you step outside of that and you start to do that work, you don't even realize, like, yo, the reason my grandfather did this is because he grew up during Jim Crow and he used to get spit on every day. Or the reason my grandmother has anxiety like this is because she was abused sexually, or her mother was a slave, or whatever these things are. Sometimes it's just so pervasive that sometimes you don't even, until you take a calculated and specific effort, you don't even realize the effects that oppression has on you, and you don't realize the trauma, that we're going through, So yeah, I think those answers are spot on. This kind of leads to my next question. This is the $1 million question. This is about our response to oppression. right? So I think we framed the conversation very well. We talked about the historical context. We talked about what oppression is. We talked about some of the effects that it had, the all-encompassing effects that it has on us. So this question is about how we respond to oppression. So this could be on a personal level. And y'all started to touch on some of these points. This could be like in an intimate space. Like, how do we as human beings respond to it in terms of managing our own emotions and mental health? And then it could be, how do we respond as a people? Like, what responses do you feel like we should have, in your opinion? And are there any responses that you feel maybe our energy could be better spent elsewhere? I know that's kind of touchy, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think first, on a personal tip, there's two ways that I have responded personally to this latest trigger, because there was at no point has it stopped, but this latest trigger and flare up, I would say. The first thing is to not cut myself off, but to limit the ways in which I am bombarded with images of it. And I touched on how on social media there is a large backlash to the idea of being shown the images over and over and over. And one of the things for me, I was talking to a friend, is I do not watch the news, because the news, by design, it plays and it intensifies and it amplifies your emotional feedback in order to sell advertising. People pay news companies for TV ad time because they know people are watching. So in the result, in a capitalist society, the news, it can't report news to inform people. It has to keep people hanging on the edge of their seats, not wanting to turn it off. And so in that, it takes whatever emotions we're feeling and it amplifies them, it intensifies them. And then it's because African people's humanity is dismissed and disregarded, it distorts our emotional response too. So what happens is people who have had no prior planning, no prior training, no prior thought about what to do, immediately become worked up, riled up, and whipped into a frenzy. And then wherever they go, they go with this frenzied attitude. And most times, 9 times out of 10, because there's been no plan and no strategy behind it, it's fruitless. So I've been limiting, of course, the news, the news channels. I replaced that a little bit with maybe Twitter, Instagram, because whereas on the news you get one viewpoint, and that is the ruling class viewpoint. On Twitter or on Instagram, you see people making all of these statements, and you have a variety of viewpoints that are being given. And if you are a discerning person, somebody who is interested in finding the truth or getting closer to the truth, people can provide you sources. People will say, hey, you need to go read this, or their opinions are informed opinions. And I think it helps to, in a way, kind of balance out the skew of information that's being given. So that's and the second thing is studying, reading. You start off by saying we're well read. Don't read half as much as, I feel like I should be reading or need to be reading. And these times, they shock me in a sense into saying, man, bro, you're way out and way off of where you need to be. You got a bookshelf full of books, but they got dust on them. So in these times, I also kind of take the books down and then begin to read, to be reminded of the fact that what's happening is not isolated, what's happening is not new. And then that stills me to a point where I can now begin to think and begin to plan and continue the work that I've been doing. So that's me on a personal tip. I'll let Ansharaye talk, and I guess we can move on to the collective side.
All right. As far as my personal bubble and how I've been responding to the current traumatic situation, I have not yet left the house and been in the streets, but the work that I have been doing is connected to the organizing folks who are in Philadelphia and the moves that are being made right now as far as who we are connected to, what needs to happen, and what are the next steps. And it's been like, there's been a lot of up and down as far as my own personal management of emotion. Because I mentioned before that I typically, when these things happen, I just block, I numb, because I have to keep functioning. I got to keep working. I got to keep living. I got to keep moving. But being in the house, that hasn't necessarily been an option. So I've been like doing a lot of crying, but also doing a lot of rage, a lot of being enraged. So, and just trying to stay aware. So raising awareness about like the Philly Bail Fund for people who have been arrested as a result of some of the things that have been happening downtown. I helped to write a couple statements. I talked to my brother who's on city council, and we talked about what police reform looks like, even though, and we can talk about voting and what's voting, the purpose of it and what it looks like, whatever. But I really I'm thankful that my brother is in place to do things. And he told me pretty candidly, he was like, I, as a politician, have to compromise, which I think is the failure again of let's be a part of the system because it works. Like he's like, there are things I have to give, but you don't have to give anything. You're not sitting in the seat. So punch everybody in the face, like go out, like resist, do it. But on that same hand, like me and my brother, I shared this link with him because I was watching this police standoff. Somebody was going live in Philly. And one of the other council members was out there like trying to talk. She was standing in between the police in riot gear and the community. And she was talking to them like, listen, y'all, like this my hood straight up. I don't want to see none of y'all hurt. I don't want to see any of this go down. Like, I want everybody to be safe. And there are people in the community screaming at her, like, this is awesome. Like, why are you standing in the middle of us? Let us do it. Da, da, da. She's talking to them like, listen, y'all, we put policy together. We figure it out. But, like, y'all are young people. I don't want to see none of y'all hurt. Like, she kept saying, like, please just, I don't want to see nobody else get hurt. So I'm thankful that those people, the Black council members and Black members of government, are in place to do some of that work. And my brother ended up going out there with her because he was watching this. Like, I can't just watch this. I can't just watch her be out there. So just all of that, like and people are in the streets at this point, like risking life. Like there's still a pandemic. And me being in the house, like this is somebody that I care about. This is West Philly. This is my hood. These are people that I know, and all of this happening and me not being able to participate, also being enraged, also being concerned about everybody's health and my own health and all that other stuff. It's just a lot to manage and navigate. But rage still is the appropriate response. Like I firmly believe it's the appropriate response to being in a situation where systems ignore you. So be mad. Everybody should be mad. As far as how we deal with this, like Khari brought up the reading, and I think people think about movements and things that happen in a vacuum, and because they do that because we don't have the full context of what it means and what the movements that have happened, what they looked like, and as they evolved on the ground, like all of the organizations, all the coalitions, all the human beings who were there making moves so that a vote would matter, or that a person, a candidate would be held accountable, or that things could be done. And even as all of this public resistance is happening in the streets, there is a strong swelling undercurrent of people who are talking about what is next, like what are the next steps, like where does all this energy go, how do we stop the budget? Because the other thing that Philly is organizing around right now, and people in LA are organizing around, there's increases to the police budget that is happening right now, which is madness in a time when, again, people are struggling to meet their basic human needs in the middle of a pandemic. We have health needs that need to be met. And the number one priority in the mayor's budget right now is it giving a $14 million budget increase to the police and cutting everything else. Everything else has cuts. The schools, the hospitals, the art budget is experiencing 100% cut. So here's where our priorities lie. And these are the things, this is oppression and this is trauma. But the undercurrent right now, the swell that's happening right now is like, listen, y'all, that's some trash. And that cannot happen. This cannot happen, especially not in Philadelphia. But it's that groundwork that needs to happen in order to make the movement move forward. Way less than voting. That system is totally 100% bankrupt to me in my mind and heart. Like, the rule book is gone. Anything goes. There is no loyalty. There is no justice. People can cheat. People can encourage interference, and still be politicians, still keep their jobs. There is no honor in the process. There's faithless electors, and there's only a few. But the fact that the members of the Electoral College can decide whether or not to vote for or against the popular vote makes it all a lie. So that's that. So voting is good for a few things. Voting helps us to prevent super egregious rollbacks of rights. But it can't be a vehicle for change. Right now, fundamentally, it is flawed. In the United States, the democratic system is not really what it is painted to be. So there needs to be some accountability there, but it can't be the vehicle for change. It's not functional that way.
Yeah, I like what you said, Ansharaye, about rage being really the only option, and I would agree. And there's a brother out of Atlanta. I'm sure we're familiar with him, but Bomani Baruti, Mwalimu Baruti, and what he talks about is this idea of righteous rage. That everything that Black people have been through, our rage is justified rage. But for me, I feel like that rage has to be channeled through. It's like energy, like electricity. Like the electricity from the power lines is at a certain voltage, and it has to be, channeled and brought down to a workable level. And I feel like in the moment that we're in right now, a lot of us are just taking the rage and just going out. And I think it's because we don't really know what else to do. So as you were saying, that there's this deep undercurrent, it's like in The Matrix, how he thought that the world he was seeing was the only world there was. And it's not until that he realized there's an entire world full of entire new human interactions, entire new structures, systems that are operating in your life, in your space that you're not aware of. And I think for African people, our history provides us context. So there are buildings that we walk by every day and don't realize there are people in there organizing. And so because we don't know about those people in there, we say ain't nothing going on. So that when stuff pops off, that this is the only thing I can do. But it's because we're void of knowledge. We don't know. We're ignorant of the people who are organizing, and we're not studied about how these things have happened. So I definitely agree. I saw something yesterday that was criticizing people who criticize and critique what's happening right now. And I think that's something that has to stop. I think we have to be open to critique as a people, and we cannot assume that critique means devaluing. We can't assume that critique is personal and that it is, I think we have to see the value of critique and understand that unless you're critiquing things, you can't change things. So I saw the post was saying something in the sense of people who are sitting in the comfort of their home and talking about what's going on on the street are pseudo-intellectual because they're not out there. And if you think something else needs to be done, then you need to go out on the front lines and tell the people what's going on. And there's merit to that. But I think these moments show us you can't organize in a flash. Organization doesn't work that way. Movies work that way. And that's what happens. See, we let Hollywood tell us how our history works. So what happens is on the movies, we see the white man, the black cop punch Oprah or knock Oprah out. And then we see all of a sudden all this stuff happen. And we're like, yeah, that's what happened. So we think that when these moments are happening in 2020, that we see it happen, we go out on the streets, and then we're expecting somebody with a megaphone to come up and start waxing poetic about the complexities of our struggle. And then people's rage is pointed, is focused, and then things change. But that's not how history works. That's not even how people work. That's not how movements work. So I think I have the utmost respect for people who are putting their physical lives on the line, who are saying that the rage I feel deserves my attention. It deserves my physical presence. It deserves me being out there confronting that. I respect it. I do think, though, that you can see it, and you can see it in the police force response, that the police are primed for, and we talk about, and I think it's a contradiction, is because we say that we understand what the police's function in the society is, but then we express outrage when they fulfill that function. So if you know the role of the police is to protect property and to repress humanity, then when you go out there expressing your humanity, you cannot say, look at what they're doing, this is wrong what they're doing, when you know that's what they're there for. It's like you don't get mad at a snake for biting you, you know that's what snakes do. So what do you have to do? Find a way to navigate those spaces. And I think what does that for us is study and definitely organization. And because organization is a long-term process, it cannot happen in an instant. And I think what the last thing I'll say is that all of our immediate responses, so there's a couple things. Every time this has happened, the first time I really remember is Trayvon Martin. It's after Trayvon Martin, because that was, I think, February. I remember everybody talking about boycotting everything from the state of Florida, not buying nothing from the state of Florida. But boycotts require organization. Because people break boycotts, and especially if you got needs. It's one thing if you got millions of dollars and you got disposable income and you can decide, well, I'm going to go here. I have the luxury of that. But if you don't have the luxury of boycott, that requires serious organization. I can't buy Tropicana. Okay, well, what else am I going to drink? And if there's no organization there, then I think these instant solutions that I think look for comfort in, because I think our solutions are out of comfort. It's not out of this is effective. It's I need to feel like what I'm doing matters, and I need to feel like what I'm doing is effective. But those things require hard, uncomfortable, difficult conversations, organization, clashing of ideas. All of that's involved in organization, and those things can't happen in a week, in 2 weeks, even in 3 weeks. These things take years and years. So I think for people who are behind the scenes, who are in organizations, I think it puts the onus on us to be more effective and more useful with our time, because the times between these moments are the times that we have to be really organizing and creating plans and perfecting strategies, so that when these moments happen, it's not just being critical, being critiquing, but it's having a workable plan. And that exposes that's a whole nother set of questions. But I think in these mass moments, that it requires something much deeper and much slower.
Man,
much slower.
That's powerful. I mean, something.
Hold on, can I real quick? Khari,
yeah.
You're absolutely right, and I also want to plug in like some of the work that's being done right now by Black Lives Matter LA. They have they've been advocating for changes to the budget, and they talk about the work that they've been doing as far as having an effect on the relationship of police to community has been going on for 5 years, like 5 years, like that protracted struggle. Like this has been a very, very long march of us beating against the system. It's something that people don't really grasp, but also to exactly your point, movements happen and things are able to be pushed forward because you build a container for the thing to be activated. The machine is ready to be turned on. Once the switch is flipped, like once we have another incident, it's like, I built this and now we can hit go. But unfortunately that happens on the side too of the oppressors, because one of the things that we were talking about before all of this fell down was in education again, this system of everybody having to be online and how we interact with each other online, and the fact that there are people and institutions that already have capital who are positioning themselves to change or to be in position to take the funding and take over the role of schooling for people. But then that doesn't necessarily ensure that the quality of the education is better. The only thing that's going to happen is that districts are going to be purchasing this software and it is going to function in order to provide a certain model of education. But they were ready for that. They were already ready to be like, all right, y'all, here's my idea. Now that we have this crisis, and they turn the machine on. But they're about to, like, they have the potential to, one, come up a lot of money. This is a privatization of education, which is supposed to be a public right. But also they're about to do some terrible harm, because you can't really ensure, where is the system that ensures that people are actually learning and benefiting from this? They swoop in and try to make money, which has been a lot of the criticism of the charter system as well. But absolutely, we need to be able to be building in the downtime, in the off season, during the preseason, to do things. So I want to plug my books, because I think that they help us really understand what these things look like. This book is a story of one individual's journey in law, and talks about, it's called All Deliberate Speed by Charles Ogletree. And it's the story of Brown versus Board of Education, which people lift up as one of the great victories of the civil rights movement. But it's also the heartbreaking tale of how Brown versus Board was systematically undone, which is instructive and is not necessarily meant to be support for the fact that the system doesn't work, but just a cautionary tale. Like, this is what happens. You can work on something for years, you can build it up for years, and then it can be dismantled, and then you have to, it's a push and pull, the pendulum swings. So these are the things that have been struggled with, and these are the ways that people came together and coalesced and organized in order to make something happen. Same thing in LA. Again, they have something called the People's Budget LA. You can look it up, Google it. I encourage you to Google it. But they list all their demands and the things that they think should be happening with tax dollars. And then at the bottom, just like when businesses put, like, these are our partners, this is who we work with, there's a good, healthy scroll full of logos of organizations that we all contributed to this. We did the research. We was in the community. We were getting people together. We were knocking on doors, because the organizing happens when the people function in order to support each other. The other book that I have not yet read but want to look at is called Betrayal: How Black Intellectuals Have Abandoned the Ideals of the Civil Rights Era. And it has to do with how we uphold this moment again. It's like, oh, look at all this happened, such a beautiful, wonderful, glorious day. But the goals, the things that were supposed to happen as a result of the civil rights movement have not happened. Is because people basically settle for integration. Like, we're in, now we can move forward, but we didn't get the equality that we were supposed to get. We're still dealing with segregation. People walked away from the demand of being like, no, we want to be able to make sure that our communities are functional and survive and have their needs met. All of that went in the trash when people had access to whiteness. So that, again, is another cautionary tale. Like, we can push, we can get in position, but when you try to integrate into a system, you got to really be mindful about what you are trading away in order to do that. And that once you get in there, you're either going to hold to the ideals or you're going to become a part of the problem. So read.
Man, I just want to drop something in there before you go, Khari. These are powerful points, because I love what y'all said about, so I love what Ansharaye started with about rage it's a natural emotion, right? Like, we're going to experience rage, but then I like what y'all both said about being able to channel that rage into something that you've organized, and being able to use that rage like electricity to fuel something that you've created. Like, I like the analogy of turning it on like a machine. And I like the point about history kind of being qualified to kind of contextualize everything that's going on. And I think that the point that you made too, Khari, we like sensationalism. Hollywood loves sensationalism. And so even in how we look at the figures that we idolize, we don't look at the genealogy of how they arrived where they arrived. We don't look at the movements they were a part of. We tend to look at them as like a messiah. So like Martin Luther King, we don't look at how people like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks were chosen as a part of existing structures that were organized because of what they could symbolize. With Malcolm X, we don't look at the fact that his father was involved in the Garvey movement, and he comes from a long genealogy of Black nationalism. We don't study the nation and how the nation kind of took Malcolm and made him into who he is. And obviously he became more than that, but the Hollywood view of it kind of fuels this idea that it's just going to be one moment. It's going to be one person who stands up there with a megaphone and says the right thing, and everybody does, what they need to do. And so I love y'all points about how it has to come from an organized structure, and we can take advantage of these electrifying moments when they happen if we've organized. But go ahead, Khari.
Yeah. And the last thing I would say is I think you ended, Ansharaye, by talking about how the integration sabotaged us because we traded our ideals and our morals for access to whiteness. And I was thinking, even in the context of organizing, if you look back, our most successful movements have been movements that have not relied on any instance. It didn't appeal to the government for validation, for legitimacy, that all of its power, all of its resources, all of its energy came from the community internally. It was internally generated and it was internally recycled. And I think that's something that I think we're going to have to get back to, because the moment, I think you cannot be in a system of power and be actively fighting for its destruction. It goes against the law of self-preservation. So it's difficult, I think, for you to advocate within a system to make fundamental changes, especially a system like this, where it fundamentally is based on your inhumanity. It's hard to advocate for that system to accommodate your humanity. And I think that unless we are organizing with ourselves and creating the power dynamics in our community, it'll always be co-opted, because ultimately the needs, the desires, the goals, the interests of the ruling class will outweigh what the people say they want, what the people say they need. Because if the people are organizing to tap into the power base that exists, it's incompatible. I think that people have to start generating our own power, generating our own institutions, because when these institutions, the governmental institutions, as they're getting weaker, we can see it on a global level, they're getting weaker. And when they fall, if we haven't began to develop any kind of systems that we are in control of, that we facilitate, and that sustain us, then it puts us at a serious disadvantage. So I think it makes the work that's happening behind the scenes so much more important, so much more critical, I think, and urgent. And I think the last thing I'll say is I think it requires a thing of urgent patience, so that you're clear that the change isn't going to happen in a day, but you work as if the day you're working is the last day you have. Urgent patience, and that requires, once again, you gotta study. We gotta be studying, and for me, I think this time's conversation, it just reminds me, I'm not studying enough. And it's not to say that there's no action, but I think you gotta have both. And there's so little studying and so much action going on that imbalance is not healthy for us as a people. So.
Okay, yeah, I'm still on mute. No, I think those are excellent points, and I think that the answers y'all gave are very practical. So I think it's a good place to stop. I know we could talk about this all day. Look, I appreciate y'all immensely for taking your time out to talk to me, and just to drop some knowledge. And I'll definitely plan to have y'all on here some more, because I know y'all have a wealth of knowledge. And so get back to uplifting communities, doing work, studying, getting your personal selves right.